What's up, ladies and gentlemen? You're watching the Mend the Marriage video series. And this particular video is one of the most important because over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you some techniques to prevent and diffuse arguments with your spouse. Whether or not you frequently argue with your partner, this is important stuff that can improve your relationship. So let's get started, shall we? First, let me temper your expectations somewhat. Fights are completely normal, and every married couple is going to disagree from time to time. So if you're hoping to completely eliminate conflict from your marriage, then you're out of luck because that's neither possible nor is it healthy. An occasional argument can be productive if it doesn't cause lingering resentment or hard feelings. Sometimes bickering from time to time can prevent things from building up and escalating into a massive screaming match. Simply put, you're not going to avoid ever arguing with your spouse again, but you can take steps to make sure that your disputes are more productive and less harmful to your relationship as a whole. Similarly, you also need to remind yourself that not every argument is going to end with a resolution or a compromise that leaves you both satisfied. Sometimes you simply need to shut down the discussion, even if you haven't come to any closer to finding common ground. If things are getting ugly in an argument, if one or both of you is becoming irrational and making things personal, then it's better to take a break and cool down before you continue. Things can spiral out of control quickly, and swearing, screaming, throwing a tantrum, those things are not going to help you sort things out. That's the kind of toxic behavior that you need to eliminate from any arguments with your spouse. One of the best ways to prevent arguments actually completely contradicts a commonly accepted belief. Perhaps you've heard people say that you should never go to bed angry. Well, whoever said that certainly didn't know much about relationships because it's terrible advice. Often it's a very good idea to stop fighting and to go your separate ways until you've cooled off and you can revisit the discussion with a more rational mindset in the future. I personally find that when my wife and I get into a fight that's escalating out of control and we simply go our separate ways and agree to talk again the following day, the issue often just disappears and we both forget about it. Now that's not realistic if you're arguing about something fundamental and important, but for those day-to-day bouts of bickering, sleeping on it often makes the problem simply go away. Suffice to say that it's completely acceptable to go to bed angry because you'll usually wake up less angry and more able to have a mature, rational discussion with your spouse. There are also times when you can prevent an argument before it even begins. One of the best ways to avoid unnecessary conflict is to try and agree with your spouse to withhold all criticism and avoid bringing up topics that may lead to conflict for a certain amount of time, an hour, say, before you say them out loud to one another. This is especially effective for those little day-to-day disagreements that have no real importance, but often spiral into much larger fights that can damage your marriage. Let's say, for instance, that you hate it when your spouse takes a shower and leaves puddles of water on the bathroom floor. I don't know about you, but I hate it when my socks get wet. It's the kind of minor annoyance that couples fight over all the time. In the past, you might have yelled after stepping in that puddle of water, screaming at your spouse, "I've asked you a million times to wipe up the damn floor after you shower," or something along those lines. But if you are able to bite your tongue and wait an hour before you air out minor grievances like this, you'll find that two things will happen. One, you'll be less heated than you were in the moment, making it less likely that you'll lash out at your partner or start yelling at one another. And two, you'll have time to think of a way to tell your spouse how you feel in a constructive, non-confrontational way. When it comes to minor disagreements like the one I just described, it's also good to keep things in perspective. Has anyone died as a result of there being water on the bathroom floor? Are you still bothered by it 30 minutes later, or did you simply put on a new pair of socks and carry on with your day? If you really take the time to analyze the importance of these little annoyances, you'll see that they simply don't warrant any kind of major argument, and you can pick and choose your battles more carefully. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you should just shut up and withhold your feelings when your partner does something that you don't like or that you don't agree with. That's just as bad because over time it can lead to resentment and that simply builds and builds over time. Or it can simply mean that you're holding back your emotions until you get so upset that you explode with anger and emotion, causing a massive fight that could damage your relationship. So instead, the key is to make small changes in behavior that prevent small issues from turning into big arguments, such as the tactic I just mentioned earlier of always waiting, at least 30 minutes or an hour before you bring up a complaint or a point of contention with your spouse. And as I mentioned, taking time to cool down before bringing up the subject also has another benefit. It allows you to choose your words carefully. This is definitely important because how you word something can have a huge impact on the way it's perceived by your spouse. One Harvard professor advises always beginning statements with the word I instead of you as a way of keeping an argument civilized and avoid it from becoming personal. So in the example I talked about earlier, say you wait half an hour and then you approach your spouse and say something like, "I really don't appreciate it when you leave water on the bathroom floor after you shower. I always end up stepping in it and having to change my socks. It's very frustrating." You see how much less confrontational and critical that sounds than if you simply, yelled, "Ah, you left water on the damn floor again," down the hallway at your partner? And the best thing is that this kind of thing is completely within your control. You don't have to get your partner to buy in. Sure, he or she may not use this tactic when they're annoyed at you, but at least you can do your part and employ simple little tactics like the ones I just described to dramatically cut down the frequency and intensity of arguments with your spouse. Another easy way to make your feelings known about something that annoys you without upsetting your partner and starting a major fight is to suggest an alternative action that you would find acceptable. For instance, you could say, "Honey, I really don't appreciate it when you leave water on the bathroom floor. How about we buy one of those big bath mats for you to use when you shower so the floor doesn't get so wet?" This way, you're proposing a solution that doesn't require your spouse to change his or her behavior dramatically, but that will also potentially solve the problem. Or at least it'll improve things to some degree without forcing your spouse to give in or lose the dispute. Now, those are some techniques that can help avoid bickering and arguing over little day-to-day annoyances or disagreements. But what if you find yourself in a fight with your partner anyway? Maybe he or she has started it by criticizing you over something, or maybe you're talking about something important and you aren't willing to back down. Either way, whatever the cause of the fight, you don't want it to get excessively toxic and cause long-term resentment or damage to your marriage. One of the single most effective ways to stop the escalation of an argument is to inject some humor when things are getting ugly. So, if the wet bathroom floor dispute gets out of hand, you could hit the pause button and say something like, "This is all because you hate my polka dot pair of socks, isn't it? You could just tell me instead of laying traps to get them wet so I can't wear them." Okay, that's not actually very funny, but you get my point. Humor lightens the mood, it puts the tension on hold, and it can actually act as a turning point where you both start to recognize the futility of the argument. Now, don't do this too often, or when your partner is trying to convey a serious issue in a mature way. Those are times when you do need to listen and respond appropriately. But if you're fighting and things seem to be escalating out of control unnecessarily, inject a little humor and you'll see how effective it can be at causing things to cool off a bit. So those are all good ideas that you can start using today to keep arguments from getting out of hand. But the last piece of advice I have for you is perhaps the most important. If you want to be happily married and enjoy a long-term connection with your partner, you need to give up any desire you have to be right. When you and your spouse fight, there's really no winner at all. You both lose, even if you think you've been victorious because your partner caves into a demand. The only way you can actually win is by reaching a mutually satisfactory resolution in a calm and civilized manner. Now, I see this need to be right, or the desire to be the winner, all the time when couples fight in public. As a matter of fact, just a few days ago, I was in line at the grocery store, and the couple behind me was having a vicious argument. The topic they were fighting over was fairly ridiculous. They were arguing over whether or not the recipe for whatever they were making for dinner called for 2 limes or 1 lime. And seriously, this carried on for several minutes, both of them making arguments back and forth about the cost of a lime, the dish being ruined with too little lime in it, the effort required to return to the store later if they need another lime, and so on. But how could either of them end up winning this fight? The reality is that neither of them could remember whether the recipe called for 2 limes or 1, but both wanted to be right, so they kept on fighting. If either of them had simply let go of their need to win and said something like, "You know what, I don't really remember, maybe you're right. Let's just get 2 dimes just in case they're only $1 each." The entire thing, if they'd said that, would have been resolved on the spot, and neither of them would remember the argument 5 minutes later. Sadly, they continued to fight for some time, and surely the lingering hard feelings lasted for some time after the fight ended. Obviously, I have no idea how many limes the recipe actually did call for, but I definitely know that whoever was right about it isn't any better off than they would have been had they just dropped the subject or let it blow over. The moral of the story is, stop trying to be right and don't get fixated on winning. In reality, nobody wins when you get into unnecessary arguments, so you might as well step up to the plate and have the integrity to admit defeat or avoid getting dragged into a debate over it. So that's a lot of information for you to digest, so I'm going to end the video here. Hopefully you can use some of the techniques I've explained in this video to cut down on this frequency of arguments with your spouse and the severity of those fights. Little changes can make a big difference in the long run, so it's definitely worth the effort to put this stuff into practice in your daily life. That's it for now. Best of luck, and I'll talk to you soon.